I've got to be honest here. I filmed the clips for this video several weeks ago. I had originally filmed it to be a companion to my how to sew partial seams video, but I seem to have lost several clips, and I filmed before I had reliable audio, so there are a lot of clips with just me waving my hands around. I'm gonna skip ahead to the finished quilt top because I did a little hand quilting experiment that I want to share with you. But before we go to the experiment, I just want to say I'm not a professional quilter, I'm an enthusiast. I hand quilt because I think it's fun, it's relaxing, and I'm not really shooting for perfection. Also, I'm not sure if this is already an established technique. I've never seen it done before, but let me know if I'm reinventing the wheel. If it was already an established technique, I really wish I would have learned it sooner because it gave me a really nice finish to my quilt. If I am accidentally a quilting genius, and this is an original idea, let's call it something like Edges a la Thimble Storm, or Thimble Storm Super Simple Edges, something like that. If you can think of a better name, leave it in the comments below. Since I already have you here, I thought it might be interesting to walk you through how I prep my quilt for my quilting hoop. So here's my mini quilt sandwich. I've thread basted one way, and now I've turned my quilt and I'm gonna thread baste the opposite direction. I make a large quilter's knot and I take my first stitch below the quilt in the batting. I like to start thread basting in the middle and I work my way out. Then I take a quick stitch in the middle of each piece, and for larger quilts I don't take that many stitches. I will use like maybe a hand width distance and just take a stitch every 4 fingers. It also helps that I'm doing this on my cutting mat, because if I was doing it on like a kitchen table, it would, scratch the finish. I don't use fancy thread for this either. I'll often use like a cheap thread or a novelty thread, or a thread I've inherited from someone else. Just something that will stand out from the quilt. I prefer hand basting when I'm hand quilting in a hoop or on a quilting frame, because safety pins just get in the way. They're sort of cumbersome and you're always having to rearrange them. But with the thread, I can just easily clip it away as I go. It's a lot simpler that way. So I love hand quilting. It's so relaxing, it's very repetitive, mindless. It's great to do in front of the TV. But the edges and corners have always been a challenge for me, because when you move the hoop to work on the corners or the edges, it doesn't put any tension on the quilt top. It's just holding the batting and the backing. And so the quilt top just sort of loosely flaps around, and that can lead to like uneven quilting or maybe a tuck or a bubble, and it's just frustrating. So now it's time to get experimental. I got this idea from watching long arm quilting videos, and I've never seen anyone else talk about this idea for hand quilting. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. I'd love to know if there was already a technique, what it's called, and if it works better than my experiment that I'm about to do. I'm going to baste these scraps onto my quilt top and use them as leaders. This fabric was gifted to me, so it's sentimental, but it's not really a color that I would use in a quilt. And I cut it in a few long strips, and I hemmed one edge to make it sturdier and less likely to stretch and warp as I use them. And when I'm done, I'm just gonna seam rip them and set them aside and use them for another project. I'm only going to use 3 leaders so I can reduce waste. I'm just going to move the top leader to the bottom when I've finished quilting from the middle to the top. And so when I move it to the bottom, then I'll quilt from the middle to the bottom. Also, I am basting the leaders to my quilt top with the longest stitch that my machine will allow to make it easier to rip later on. This is my favorite quilting hoop. I've had hoops where this fastener doodad I'm sure it has a name, I just don't know what it is. But I've had hoops that would loosen as I quilted, and I'd have to keep tightening it back up, but this one is very sturdy and reliable. It also has this useful ridge and groove built onto the inside of the ring, and it locks together and it holds your project securely without slippage. I can't remember what brand this hoop is. I'm gonna try to hunt up a link for you. So if you're interested, check the description box below. Some people say you should make your quilt drum tight, and then others say you want it really loose. But I like mine with just a little bit of give, not too tight, not too loose. But again, I'm not a professional, and I don't do teeny tiny stitches. I tend to do big stitches because I like to see my work. I also make sure to check the back before I tighten the fastener thing all the way. I'm checking to make sure there aren't any tucks or bubbles, and everything is just laying flat. A quick note on hoop size: bigger is not better, in my opinion. I prefer a hoop that will fit comfortably in my elbow and I can still reach all the way to the other side. In fact, just a little smaller than from my fingertips to my elbow is the perfect size for me. I originally thought bigger was the way to go because you wouldn't have to move your hoop as much, but it just becomes uncomfortable and it's harder to manage. But this may be a matter of preference. Okay, at this point I've quilted everything from the middle of the mini quilt to the top leader, so I'm ready to seam rip the basting line and move my top leader to the bottom. And this is why I used my longest stitch length, to make it easier to seam rip. Leave a comment below if you'd like to see more hand quilting content, or if you have any specific questions that I can answer. So this experiment turned out really successful for me. It was easy to baste, it was easy to seam rip, and it really gave a good tension to my quilt. I'm going to use these quilt leaders to finish my mystery quilt, but since it's so much larger, I'm going to wait until I finished maybe like 90–95% of the quilt before I add on my super simple hand quilting leaders. But that should make finishing my mystery quilt so much easier and more enjoyable. And here are the tools that I use the most when I'm hand quilting. I like this open-ended adjustable thimble, and this is a needle book I made a little while ago. And my favorite thread for hand quilting is 12-weight sulky thread. It's just the best I've used so far. Let's take a quick look at the finished mini quilt. The hand quilting leaders really helped me achieve a nice, flat, even mini quilt. It's so cute. Thanks for watching. I'll see you again soon.